Going beyond the headlines. Asking the questions you want answered. Exploring government policies and how they impact you. We are delving deeper.
Good evening and welcome to Delving Deeper. I'm your host, Kimberly D'Souza. Joining us this evening is the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, Mr. Reginald Armour, SC. AG Armour, thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Kimberly. Thank you for being here.
Let me just say it is an absolute pleasure to have you here for your first sit-down interview since assuming office. So we really take pleasure in having you here.
It is very good to be here. And yes, indeed, it's the first sit-down.
It is your first.
Yep.
So I'll try not to go too hard on you.
Please. I keep saying to everyone, I'm new to this, and I've never been a media person. So there you go.
All right, well, let's see how we can go.
Yep.
Now, AG Armour, I'm going to start off with, of course, you entering the political arena. You would have had, let's say, over 40 years as a lucrative and a very successful career as an attorney at law, but you took the decision to enter the political arena in March. What would have prompted that decision?
A phone call from the Honourable Prime Minister, who asked me to do national service. And I did a mental double take and I said, can I speak with my family? Which I did. I gave it some thought. I've been, as you say, in practice for a long time, but I've also done a significant amount of what I consider to be public service. In my early days, I've been a member of the Legal Aid Authority. I've been a member of the Law Reform Commission. I have served as president of the Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago. I've acted as a High Court judge, Trinidad and Tobago, as a Court of Appeal judge of the Eastern Caribbean. And until very recently, in fact, until the day before my assuming office, I was chairman of the Council of Legal Education, which runs our 3 law schools, one in the Bahamas, one in Jamaica, and here in Trinidad, the Hugh Woodin Law School, which council produces our lawyers, the majority of our lawyers across the Caribbean, from the Bahamas in the north, all the way down to Trinidad, across to Belize and Guyana. So I've done public service, but when I was asked to do national service, I thought, not a bad idea, because what I thought I could bring to the table was the accumulation of those years of experience, both in private practice and in public service, and to put that at the service of the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Of course. Now, I think it's fair to say that although you wanted to perform that national service, it's been sort of a rough couple months since you assumed office in March, right? I mean, let's look at it. First of all, there was calls for your resignation because of your dual citizenship. There was also the Miami court matter that you have spoken about ad nauseum. And of course, then there was the no confidence vote that you survived from the Law Association. I mean, how do you respond to these challenges? Did you expect all these hurdles when you assumed office?
The dual citizenship challenge I expected. I have myself done cases involving dual citizenship, and I took advice, which reassured me that there was no issue. The issue with the Miami case, I did not anticipate nor expect. It was a case I did 14 years ago, more than that. It was the furthest thing from my mind. It came across my table on the 30th of March. I took office on the 16th. And I said to the lawyers, the Miami lawyers, right away, I can't get involved in this case because I would have a conflict of interest having previously represented a client. But I'm your client, so advise me, what do I do from here? And they said, we'll wall you off. So that was unexpected. But when the vote of no confidence came along, I was interested to see how it would go, because having been president of the Law Association, I know the lawyers. And I expected and I was heartened by the process, and I paid homage to that in a statement I made afterwards. I was humbled by the maturity of the association, even the lawyers who brought the motion. And at the end of the day, I think that good judgment and professionalism prevailed. and we move on from there.
Now, AG Armour, you said that you knew the lawyers, of course, being the former president of the Law Association. Do you think because of that advantage, you were able to sway their decision so that you would have come out victorious at the end?
I think I had the advantage of knowing that I could appeal to people's professionalism and good sense. As I said in the statement that I made at the meeting of the Law Association, I said it openly, I made a mistake. It was 14 years ago, I was on vacation in Europe. I apologize. And I was humbled by the fact that good sense prevailed.
Now, I like that you mentioned the Miami case, and it would be irresponsible of me. I know, Attorney General, we have been here before, but I have to ask. One of the things that you said in the many press releases you would have said was that you just simply may have forgotten your involvement in it. And so how is that you could have forgotten your involvement in such an important case? And then you would have also mentioned that you recused yourself as a result of everything that was taking place. Can you just explain that for us, please?
Well, recusal. What does recusal mean? It means that if you perceive that you have either an actual or a perceived conflict, then you disassociate. You say, I'm not going to get involved. And when I received the phone call from the Miami lawyers on the 30th of March to discuss the matter, the very first thing I said to them is, gentlemen, I don't think that I should get involved in this case because I had previously represented a client and I consider that I should recuse myself. So that's what that meant, that as Attorney General, I did not think I should get involved in a case in which in my former life as a private attorney, I had previously represented one of the attorneys where the state of Trinidad and Tobago was now prosecuting those very clients, not attorneys, those very clients. So I recused myself in that sense. I said, I don't think I should have anything to do with it. And of course, being the client in that situation, being the representative of the state of Trinidad and Tobago, I left it to the lawyers, the Miami lawyers, to advise me how I should deal with it from there on. I took their advice. In terms of not remembering, the fact of the matter is I was abroad. It was 14 years ago. I got a call late one evening asking me to sign an affidavit. And I was careful to say in the affidavit, I don't recollect all the details. I have no papers. So I didn't remember the details at the time. When it was brought to my attention that I had made an error, I immediately accepted I had made an error and I asked my attorneys to explain to the judge that I'd like to explain it. I never got that opportunity.
Right. And AG Armour, I would also add as well, were there any other cases in which something similar happened? Something where you were a client in a case or something where you were part of a case and something came up and you would have forgotten what happened at that point in time?
I'll put it this way. One of the things about being a lawyer in the combat arena in which I operate as an adversarial lawyer is you have to literally create compartments in your head. You move from case to case. And I always tell my staff, I am an intense person in terms of my focus. So when my head is down in one thing, if the building is on fire, somebody please tell me there's a smoke because I don't smell the smoke. So you move from case to case and you literally put one case out of your mind once you're finished with it in order to focus on the next case. Mm-hmm. That's the way the profession operates. In fact, there's a passage from a judgment that was referred to me long after this was all over, in which a judge actually said that. If I could pull it up, I'd pull it up and read it for you, but I'm not going to bore you with the details. You shut down, you close the chapter, and you move on. So it's a matter of having closed that chapter, and if there is no prompt to cause you to bring it back up, and you pull your papers and say, well, let me see what the papers say, it's gone.
Okay. Well, let's look at the new chapter in your career, your political career. And let's talk specifically about the Bail Amendment Bill. Now, while you were the president of the Law Association, you would have been very critical about this Bail Amendment Bill. But here you are years after in Parliament and you're trying to get it passed as Attorney General. What are some of the differences between what you would have criticized then and what you're trying to get passed now?
One of the critical differences is the time difference. I was president of the Bar Association, the Law Association, somewhere around 2016, 2017, when that edition of the bill came up, and I was critical of it. We are in 2022. we are concerned with a completely different state of affairs in Trinidad and Tobago in 2022, in which people's personal security is a matter of everyday concern. And as a government and as Attorney General, I have to be sensitive to that, responsive to that, and to try to find a legislative formula that will give people that sense of personal security. So that's the essential difference today, 2022, as opposed to back in 2017.
And are you going to try to bring it back to Parliament again?
Yes, I intend to. In fact, I said as much in my wind-up in the bail debate. We are actually working on it as I speak. I have, and I pay tribute to them immediately, a very talented, competent team of lawyers in the Law Reform Commission, in the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, and in the departments that work with me. So work is being done on that. I mentioned the fact that I would want to have further consultations, which I am proposing to have, and even to engage the views of criminologists to make sure we get it right the next time.
Of course.
To protect our citizens.
Now, AG Armour, I want to drill down a little bit on the bail amendment bill. You said there are plans to take it back to Parliament, but what is going to be done differently now to ensure that it passes in the Parliament?
Well, first we'll learn the lesson of the first attempt that failed. So to that extent, we need to go out there and do greater consultation. We need to work with the provisions of the legislation that will, the concerns that people have. And then we will go back into the Parliament and make the case again. And the priority has to be to get the opposition to understand that while we respect people's rights, we need to have citizens feel secure and safe. And having repeat offenders out there in the streets is a concern that needs to be addressed. So greater consultation. I inherited the bill that I brought to Parliament. I had worked on it. I think that I did an insufficient amount of consultation with my colleagues on both sides in the House. And therefore, what will I do differently now? I would want to go back into a more engaged process of consultation. And I'm also going to bring on board some expertise, some criminologists and people who will assist me to get my message across better, to make the draft legislation, which has been worked on now as a work in progress, more fact sensitive and therefore more manageable for people to accept. I've heard the opposition and the other contributions in the Parliament. We've taken it back to the drawing board. And what I will do differently this time when I take it back into Parliament is to spend more time than I spent on my prior excursion speaking with the members of Parliament to get them to understand before I pilot the bill what I'm trying to accomplish with reference to that particular piece of legislation, and particularly to speak to the independent senators.
Now, AG Armour, I'm definitely hearing the passion in your voice in being an attorney at law in terms of, if there's a fire, somebody needs to tell you because you wouldn't see the spoken. So I'm hearing that. And so I'm wondering, do you miss your private practice? Do you miss being an attorney now that you're serving us nationally?
That's an interesting question. I don't miss private practice to the extent that I have engaged in a new dimension of my practice. So it's now not private practice. It's public commitment to continuing to deploy and to engage and to contribute the skill set and the experience that I bring to the table. Do I miss the camaraderie of sitting down with lawyers that I can engage outside of political combat? Yes, I am disappointed with the degree of, what shall I say? I don't want to use words that are unfortunate, but that level of camaraderie and engagement that I used to have at the private bar with lawyers who I would be appearing against today, whom I would be working with tomorrow, that doesn't exist, I find, in the Parliament. The differences are remarkable, and I find that regrettable between the different camps that represent different party's interests in the parliament. I find that very regrettable.
Do you think there's a way to bring that camaraderie in Parliament, although we're on two opposing sides?
I'm hoping that one of the things that I can do is to make some difference there, because I've had no political history, and I surprised my colleagues in the government by saying in one of the first meetings, I'm not a politician. I have never been a politician. I'm the Attorney General, which is a constitutional office, and I am engaged in the business of politics, but I'm not a cut and thrust politics that goes for the jugular at every opportunity. And I would like to hope that with my style, and there's a story I'll tell you about my style, which has to do with that hand in front of you, I would like to hope that I can bring a different tone. One of the things that I first did in the first couple of weeks, I walked up, I'm not going to call names, but I walked up to one of the members on the other side in the House, in the Senate. And I said to that person, I have known you for the last however many years. I've never heard you speak because you've always been junior counsel to a very good senior counsel, but I've heard you speak since I've been in the Senate. And I'm very impressed at what a good advocate you are. Keep it up. So, and that's the opposition that I was speaking to. I reached out, and I want to continue to reach out and say, we have a job to do for the country. Let's do it.
AG Armour, I'm interested to hear what the response was.
The response was very positive, very engaging, and I was heartened by that. And I hope that we can continue, and by we, I don't mean myself and that individual, but the members of Parliament that I work with can continue to build out a relationship.
Of course. Now, in building out that relationship, let's switch gears to the legislation in Parliament. Now, since you assumed office in March, there's been a lot of noise, right, in terms of your detractors and people who want to, vote you out of office. But I'm just wondering, what sort of legislative agenda, what is your agenda when Parliament resumes in September?
Well, let's understand what we mean by noise. If by noise we mean detractors who are going to be sniping at me, as I've said, I have the ability to focus quite intensely, and therefore I don't expect that kind of distracting noise will distract me from my job. If by noise you mean people wishing to engage me, speak with me, and even on issues that we don't agree on to get me to respond, I welcome that. I want to engage persons who would like to engage with me by the spoken word, by correspondence, so that we can communicate about me getting the job done and doing it better. And if I've made a mistake, point out to me that I've made a mistake, help me to understand how I could get it done better. Let's move on.
And if one of those people is a member of the opposition, you're willing to...
Oh, I welcome that. I welcome that, because at the end of the day, we have a duty to the public to get it right. And it's a duty to the public to serve the public, to help people to live in an environment, a national environment, in their homes and in their communities in which they are comfortable. They can walk the streets. You can not be worried about your daughter out late at night and if she's going to get home safely. The job of the government is to provide a warm, safe, secure environment in which all of us as citizens can feel that we live in a place we prefer to come home to than to run away from.
Yes. Now, the Office of the Attorney General and the Ministry of Legal Affairs is more than just providing legal advice to government. It is also more than just passing legislation. Now, under your ministry, I know, for example, there's the Registrar General Department. There's also the Office of the Chief Solicitor. Can you share some of the role and functions of these departments and others under your ministry?
Yes, under Section 76 of the Constitution, the Attorney General is to provide for the administration of legal affairs, civil, and with reference to supporting the criminal litigation that comes in the name of the state. The departments to which you refer are components within the Office of the Attorney General. The Registrar General's Department, for instance, deals with matters that are very important to the everyday life of citizens of this country. The Registrar General deals with land title. I mean, all of us want to be able to have a good, secure title to the land that we own. We want to be able to make sure that we can will our property to our children and to our grandchildren. That is the assurance that we get from the competent work, very competent work of the Registrar General's department. That department also looks after other everyday things in the lives of citizens, marriage, births, deaths, all of that comes under the Registrar General's remit. Companies registration. So it is a very large department. It actually occupies, in the building that the Office of the Attorney General functions, occupies about 8 or 9 floors to build out the public service that goes on in that department. The Chief State Solicitor supports a number of different things in terms of giving meaning to the representation that has to be built out for litigation that the state is either going to initiate or to defend, and to provide lawyers who will manage that litigation. The Solicitor General's department also does that in terms of the advocacy, actually going to court, but very importantly, gives advice in relation to complex agreements that have to be signed between state enterprises and external agencies that one is going to enter into contracts for. So many of the oil drilling and oil exploration contracts that have to be signed off by the Ministry of Energy will come to the Solicitor General's department to be vetted, and they will give opinions as to the strengths and weaknesses of particular clauses and draft the agreements or redraft the agreements, and that will come to me for approval. We also have the Anti-terrorism unit, which is a very important unit under the Anti-Terrorism Act, and that deals with just managing the ongoing threats of terrorism that occur internationally and threaten Trinidad and Tobago. At this point in time, we are looking at a draft of an amendment for the anti-terrorism legislation that is going to do something that Trinidadians have a legitimate concern about. We would remember years ago, young men, Trinidadians, left this country to join ISIS. They took with them their wives and their children. The majority, if not all, of those young men have since been killed. Those wives, children, some of whom were born in Syria, now live in camps in Syria, to which there is no international access because they fall under the control of parts of Syria that the government doesn't control, that are controlled by the terrorists still. And one of the things that we're looking to do in a recent amendment that we are discussing at this point, and I'm actually in an active consultation with the Law Reform Commission, is to provide legislation to try and find a gateway to bring those people back, but to bring them back in a way that will be sensitive to the fact that they will need help, but also sensitive to the fact that they will need to be properly assessed, both in terms of whether they may represent a security risk or health-wise, and housed in an environment which will allow them the transition back into Trinidad and Tobago. That is the work of the Anti-terrorism unit in one of its departments. We have the Central Authority, which deals with extradition. Persons who are either Trinidad nationals who have committed offenses that have crossed the borders into other countries, and other countries are applying to have those persons extradited out of Trinidad to face trial abroad. Or we may want someone extradited from abroad back into Trinidad to face trial here. The Central Authority deals with that. We have a criminal justice unit, which provides support for criminal justice issues reform and support that we can offer to the DPP, because at the end of the day, the prosecutorial function is that of the DPP under Section 90 of the Constitution, but we can give support in terms of assisting the DPP, facilitating the DPP. So that's another department of the Attorney General. And there are about 17 or 18 departments that I could go on at length, but I suspect that the detail might end up being too tedious.
I think we got a few of the really important ones. But I want to double back on something that you mentioned. You would have mentioned the citizens who would have migrated to Syria to fight in ISIS, and they would have had families. And so their fathers are no longer there. And so we have these mothers and children who are begging to come home. I'm sure you would have seen some of the articles, AG, where people have been begging to be let back in. I remember there was one specific incident where there was a woman who actually rescued 2 children from Syria and brought them to TNT. So while you're working on the legislation to make it happen, is there nothing that can be done from a TNT standpoint to bring our nationals home?
Well, there is a lot that can be done, but it's a process. So I'll give you an example. One of the challenges, as I've identified, is Trinidad and Tobago as a nation state, in speaking to the Syrian government, doesn't, through the Syrian government, have access to persons who are in camps that are controlled by the terrorists, because the Syrian government can't go in there. So the first issue is access, safe access to get in there. The second issue, if and when the Trinidad government gets access, is to visit with, and that's going to take a process, those persons, to assess them in terms of not just their health, but their DNA. We don't know if somebody says, this is the child of X, we don't know that. We're going to have to get DNA samples. All of those are details that have to be worked through a legislative process that's going to have to be built out within Trinidad, and probably even treaty arrangements with some other countries that are prepared to facilitate the return of those persons. Before I became Attorney General, I was actually involved in litigation in which I was representing the Ministry of National Security and the police on applications brought by parents of children who are now in Syria. And it's still in court. I've given up that brief. Somebody else has taken it over. But it's a very difficult process. So to answer your question, yes, there is a lot that the government wants to do and needs to do, but the legislative framework has to be built in to deal with a phenomenon that we had not previously understood was ever going to happen. That is to say, young men, Trinidadians, go into ISIS in Syria to take up arms in pursuit of the caliphate, and being killed, and then wives and children abandoned in Syrian camps. How do we get them back home? How do we give them safe passage? And when we get them back home with safe passage, how do we ensure that they will be given an opportunity to be assimilated back into Trinidad? And how do we assure the citizens of Trinidad that these persons don't represent a risk?
Yeah. And so while we're on the topic of risk, we have, and it is beginning to mount over time, this problem of human trafficking and sex trafficking in Trinidad and Tobago that I think we need to address. And so what is the Office of the Attorney General doing to address that issue that's becoming more and more frequent, I would say, as the days go by?
Well, it's more than just the Ministry of the Attorney General. To the extent that the Attorney General's ministry has a role, it has to do with beefing up our legislation. It also has to do with advice to the government and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in terms of treaty arrangements that are going to have to be looked at carefully. But very importantly, and the Attorney General can't do anything on this, it has to do with proper law enforcement techniques by the police to get out there and apprehend people who are participating in this very, very, very nefarious crime of human trafficking.
And on the flip side as well, AG Armour, sex trafficking, because we have been seeing more recent cases of police, and we could commend them here, I guess, for busting some of the sex trafficking rings that's taking place locally. Will that also take legislation as well? And if it does, what can we do in the interim to ensure that these concerns are raised and addressed with?
It's a work in progress, and we are working on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say, AG?
Well, to the extent that it's a work in progress, these are matters that are engaging. We have a Law Reform Commission. These are matters that are engaging the attention of the Law Reform Commission with a view to legislative amendments. I wouldn't want to speak to the legislative amendments in detail as yet until I get the reports and the opinions from the Law Reform Commission, because I might speak to something that the Law Reform Commission might tell me is not feasible after they've finished their research. These are matters that have to be researched very carefully, particularly where they involve treaty obligations and relations with other states, because sex trafficking crosses borders and we have to be very careful.
Of course. Now, we would have discussed some of the units under the Attorney General's office. One of that unit, of course, is the Director of Public Prosecutions. And I know that the DPP himself, Roger Gaspard, would have made mention over and over that there's a staff shortage at the department. I mean, has he reached out to you? And do you see this in any way affecting the work of the DPP?
3 questions there. Has he reached out to me? Are there concerns, and how do I see it affecting the work of the DPP? Yes, the DPP has reached out to me, and in fact, one of my immediate priorities when I took office was to meet with the DPP, Mr. Gaspard, who I knew and worked with from in my private practice, and I look forward to continuing what was a good relationship with Mr. Gaspard now that I am the Attorney General. We have met on at least 3 occasions to discuss his concerns. I have taken that meeting engagement to the point of going across with some of my staff, excuse me, to his office. And I have met with his staff, legal and non-legal, and spent a morning with them and invited them with the DPP present, and very encouraged by the DPP's engagement to say to me, what are your problems? So we've had a very candid conversation, and one of the 2 of the things that I know are being addressed, the staff shortage. I know that the Judicial and Legal Service Commission recently appointed 20 new lawyers to the DPP's office. So that's going to make a big difference. And there is a building that even before my time was allocated to the DPP where he can now move his entire staff across so that he will be better equipped to accommodate all of the staff and the different units within the DPP's office. So those are things that I know have happened, are in train, and certainly I am giving maximum priority to supporting the independence of the DPP and enabling him as best as I can bring resources to bear to get the job done, to bring home successful prosecutions.
And as much as we have hired new lawyers, do you see them being able to deal with the amount of work that they meet when they go there? Or do you see this in any way, preventing them from doing the work that's there already?
Well, there's a lot of work. There's no doubt about it. And the work continues to build. The fact that 20 new lawyers have been assigned is a step in the right direction. They are young and enthusiastic and hardworking, and they come out of the Hewardin Law School, which I was chairman of that council that runs the school. They give good, competent training. And I have every confidence that that 20 addition to the office of the DPP is going to make a difference. It is a work in progress that we have to continue to build out on.
How does the current situation at the DPP's office affect the ability to prosecute matters?
The current situation at the DPP's office is that the DPP's office has been understaffed. That current situation has been improved by the addition of 20 new attorneys. And I expect, therefore, that we will see an improvement in the prosecutorial function of the DPP's office. There are other challenges that I know that the DPP has, which involves engaging with the judiciary, because the judiciary has been building out a very aggressive judicial trial process that requires the DPP's lawyers to be in 2 places at the same time. One morning you're dealing with case management, and at the end of in the very same day you're dealing with trials. And there weren't sufficient lawyers in the DPP's department to be able to have 2 different lawyers dealing with 2 different things at the same time. So I know that's a challenge that was brought to my attention by the DPP. It is something that I have spoken with the Chief Justice about. And now with the additional lawyers, I expect that's going to build out into solutions to that quagmire. The other thing is that I know as well that the DPP has had an entire new building allocated to him. And to the extent that one of the problems was space in the building that he currently exists in at Winshaw, is that problem can be addressed once he moves over to the new building.
Now, the 20 additional lawyers, have they entered the DPP offices yet?
They are in the process of doing that. One of the challenges is space, because the building can't accommodate more people. So that's why I'm hoping that now that the new building is all but ready for occupation, we can see that move begin to take place.
Right. And so while we wait for the arrival of the additional lawyers and we wait to switch space to ensure that we have enough space to work with, what is currently happening at the DPP office at this time?
Well, let me answer that question in two ways. We're not waiting for the arrival of the lawyers. They have been assigned by the Judicial and Legal Service Commission, and as best as I understand it, subject to correction, they are being deployed by the DPP. What is happening at the DPP's office in that kind of detail, that is a detail I'd have to speak with the DPP on beyond the big picture issues that I've discussed with him. So it's not a question that I could immediately answer. That really is for the DPP to spell out.
Do you think the issuing or the granting of state briefs is as big a problem as it is made out to be?
To the extent that it is perceived to be a problem, because when attorneys general change, there is a change in the external attorneys who are retained under the direction of the incumbent attorney general. That inevitably will occur. There have been challenges in the past, which I certainly don't intend to repeat in terms of the errors that have been made with persons being given briefs who are not competent to discharge the briefs that they've been given. Mr. Justice Coleman in the Coleman inquiry, the Clico Coleman inquiry, had some very harsh remarks to make about external attorneys who had been given the task of appearing before him in that Coleman inquiry. I don't intend to repeat the mistakes that were made there. Those attorneys that I will instruct should be retained who are external attorneys. I will have the confidence of knowing that they are competent, that they are hardworking, they are dedicated to purpose. And I think that I also bring the additional dimension that I've spent the last 40 years working across the Caribbean. So I know that we have quite a lot of talented, competent attorneys across the Caribbean. And therefore, to the extent that we need to brief out to get a skill set that exists within the Caribbean, as opposed to always going to the UK to bring UK lawyers to Trinidad to do the work, I'm going to build out on those relationships that I've had over my 40 years of experience with very competent Caribbean attorneys who can come in to support the pursuit of justice and the administration of justice in Trinidad and Tobago.
So this is a good segue into the Caribbean Court of Justice, because I know that independent Senator Anthony Vieira would have tabled a motion to have the Caribbean Court of Justice as the final court in TNT. You would have supported this even before assuming office, and I'm wondering if when Parliament resumes in September, if you're going to make this part of your legislative agenda.
Last question answered first. Certainly, I am going to make it part of my legislative agenda. It is a subject about which I'm quite passionate, so I'm going to have to mute everything that I say at this stage so as not to get carried away. When I was president of the Law Association, I actually had a national consultation. We did it in Tobago, we did it in San Fernando, we did it in Port of Spain. I brought lawyers in from abroad. I brought a Jamaican lawyer who is a member of the International Criminal Court in The Hague. I brought a retired judge of the Supreme Court of India to Trinidad to speak with lawyers and the public about the fact that legitimately, as a sovereign republic, there can be no good reason why we continue to take our final appeals to the Privy Council. A lot of people don't know, and it is a colonial relic that we need to remind ourselves of. The Judicial Committee of the Privy Council started in its origins as a committee for plantations who advised Her Majesty on her plantations in the Caribbean. That's the history of the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. We need to be confident that we have very good Caribbean judges. We need to be confident in our ability to stand on our 2 feet. We need to accept that there comes a point at which you have to allow the bird to spread its wings and to claim our rightful, inevitable progress to full nationhood by embracing the Caribbean Court of Justice as our final court of appeal, saying thank you to the Committee for Plantations. You've done a good job. Goodbye.
All right. Now, I know that we are celebrating our Diamond Jubilee, our 60th year of independence, and what that calls for is a lot of fireworks. But I know that your office has also been doing some work on the fireworks bill. Can you share some more information about that one?
Yes, thank you. I mean, it's part of, what we're doing in building out our legislative agenda. Minister Sagram Singh Suklal and I go on record to thank her, and did a very good job in speaking to the nation very recently on the fireworks bill. We have listened to the comments that have come back in, and what I can say is that we are actually looking to build out a further consultation to give people another opportunity to engage more meaningfully than they were given the opportunity. I understand there were some glitches in the first consultation. We're going to have that second consultation shortly to get more input into the shape of the legislation that we will want to bring to the Parliament. And it is to take into consideration the legitimate concerns that exist in relation to protecting people from the noise and the pollution and pets and animals, recognizing that some people, consider it a business that they need to continue to build out, but we're going to have an appropriate balance.
And so while we wait on the legislation and we move into celebrating our 60th year of independence, what sort of advice can you give the population?
Please be responsible. And it is advice that a plea that I would put out to citizens of Trinidad and Tobago generally. We need to be more mindful of our neighbors in what we do, in how we live our lives, in how we carry on about our daily activities. Remember your neighbors, remember that other people have rights, and be sensitive to that.
Now, AG Armour, looking ahead, what are some of the key areas of focus on your legislative agenda? And of course, what can we look forward to from the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs?
Dealing with the legislative agenda first, of course, it would be very boring for me to go into the details. What I would say is, as Chief Legal Advisor to the government, that is to say the Attorney General, and the leading the charge on the legislative agenda, parliamentary agenda, we will want to build out on the government's policy and agenda. And if I were to identify that in terms of areas of focus, we could talk about food security. We have the Agri-Forum taking place right now. We have personal security, that is to say crime, and crime in the everyday sense, but crime also in the areas of corruption, white-collar crime, following the money. We have other areas of legislative activity. In fact, only earlier this week, I had one of my meetings with the Legislative Review Committee, which involved the members of the Chief Parliamentary Council, the members of the Law Reform Commission, and teams within the legal departments of the Attorney General's office to review the entire suite of legislation that we are looking to bring to the Parliament in the new term. And there is a significant amount in addition to some that carries over from the last Parliament. So a couple that carry over from the last Parliament would be the Private Security Bill, the Supplemental Police Act. Those are two that we definitely are bringing across. In the area of white-collar crime, we are looking to do some further work in what is called mutual legal assistance treaties, because we need to collaborate with international agencies and governments in following the money. There is a lot of corruption that has taken place over the years in this country. And out of that corruption, people have banked their money, illicitly gained money abroad. We have to have good, tough legislation to allow our law enforcement of Trinidad and Tobago work within legitimate legal means with other governments and other law enforcement agencies to get the collaboration to follow the money. We're working on that. In food preservation, food security, we will have to build out legislation to allow us to be able to have a legislative and regulatory framework to give meaning to what is happening right now with the Agri-Forum that is taking place and the collaboration that is going to be happening between Guyana and Suriname. So those are areas in which we're building out crime, basic crime control, whistleblower protection. We need to be able to get information into the police and give protection to persons who bring that information in. We need to give attention to and priority to allow for anonymous evidence coming in that the police can act on and bring it by way of evidential amendments before the courts so that it is legally admissible evidence. We need to bring legislation that will allow judges to draw legitimate legal inferences from, for instance, the silence of somebody. If a number of things are known to you and the evidence is given by the prosecution and you choose to remain silent, are there inferences that the judge will be permitted to draw from the fact that you've remained silent? All of that are part and parcel of a large suite of a legislative package that we are working on currently. A couple recent ones that we have been paying attention to. Everybody would know about the recent efforts in relation to the scrap metal. So we are now looking at building out very urgently. Yesterday, I had meetings with a number of different members of the teams that are working out of the Attorney General's office to work with the Ministry of Trade, Ministry of Finance. We are looking to go out to have consultations with not just those two ministries, but stakeholders, the legitimate persons who earn a legitimate living from scrap metal, who have been put out of work by the illicit crime that has been taking place. So we're looking to build out a legislative framework for that. Another area that we are looking at that I think is long overdue, sexual harassment in the workplace. You go to work and you are made subject to comments, remarks, and treatment that exploits your sexuality, exploits who you are, and you feel powerless because there is a power dynamic between the employer and the employee that has young people feeling helpless. They come home crying, they resign their jobs. There is little or no redress because the power dynamic is so strong. So we're building out legislation on that literally as I speak. We plan to go out for consultation within the next 10 days on that in order to bring it to cabinet and then into the parliament in the early part of the new term. So it's one of, if you were to ask me the question, what am I excited about in this new dimension that I'm operating in? I derive a great amount of meaning and satisfaction from being able to participate in bringing legislation that is going to address the needs of the citizens of this country in terms that can become part of our body of law, to give people of this country a sense of the fact that the country is working for them.
Of course. So AG Armour, one of the things I didn't hear you mention was gender equality and the idea of gender, and especially with people with same sex and of course those who LGBTQIA, that community. I know that CAISO has been lobbying government, of course, to get legislation passed to protect them as well. Where are we on this?
I'm new to the job. I don't know, and I may be wrong. And so that I'd want to ask you to invite me back so that we can discuss that. I'm not certain that Cabinet has yet settled a policy on that. And of course, the first step towards building out legislation is that the Cabinet has to make the policy decision that this is the direction they want to take the country in. So invite me back and we can talk about that another time.
I will hold you to it. And of course, one of my other questions as well, you mentioned corruption, white collar crime especially. And I'm wondering, given that context, how does campaign finance reform fall into that?
That is certainly something that needs to be looked at. I am not presently able to speak to it, but it is certainly something, when you invite me back, we can talk.
So two things we have on the list when I invite you back.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, AG, I mean, before we close, any final thoughts?
Well, except to say, Kimberly, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, with you, to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. As you said at the beginning, it was a bit bumpy. And I would say this, I chose not to speak much because the matter was sub judice, and I chose therefore not to engage the media. I know that the media is concerned that I don't seem to be responding to them. I want to give them the assurance that I will respond, I will speak but invite me to respond to questions that are focused. Better yet, I haven't changed my phone number. Everybody has my phone number. Send me a text message or WhatsApp message. Give me the messages up front. I will look at it and I will do my best to respond. It's not that I'm not talking to the media, but I've never been the type of lawyer who speaks off the cuff without having thought through my answers carefully.
Of course. Well, AG Armour, again, let me echo what I said at the beginning. Thank you so much for joining us for your first sit-down interview since assuming office at the Attorney General and the Ministry of Legal Affairs. It certainly was a pleasure, and I will hold you to that because I will have you back in again.
Excellent, and I look forward to coming back. Thank you. And thank you, Trinidad and Tobago.
Join us next week for another episode of Delving Deeper. I am Kimberly D'Souza, and on behalf of our entire crew, have a good night.